Good morning to everyone. Good morning to the people online. Welcome to Rome. This is our ninth conference, Rome Conference, in collaboration with the NPSA Society. And a lot of people are here because they belong to the NPSA Society. They follow us from many years. A lot of you are very hard friends of us, so thank you very much for the people coming in person. This conference will be approaching, it's okay because we are recording, okay, it's approaching this topic, body image, and we are going to talk about body image from many points of view. The philosophical point of view, the neuroscience point of view, the psychoanalytical point of view, and the neuropsychoanalytical point of view. Claudia Spadazzi, I'm Rosa Spagnolo, sorry, I'm Rosa Spagnolo, co-founder of Italian Psychoanalytic Dialogues with Claudia Spadazzi and Francesco Castellet Ibalarà. And Claudia Spadazzi is going to chair this morning session. Claudia Spadazzi is a full member of the Italian Psychoanalytical Society, clinical psychologist, gynecologist, sexual therapist, visiting professor in psychosomatic, so a lot of things. Okay, so above all, she is co-chair and co-founder of Italian Psychoanalytic Dialogues, and this is a really challenging sessions today. Thank you very much, Claudia.
And thank you for being here today with us. We are very happy to be at our ninth Rome Conference, and I'm really honored and pleased to introduce you Sean Gallagher, who is such a well-known philosopher and a neuroscientist. And I don't think there is a real need to introduce him because many of you already know him, and his interests are, yes, phenomenology, philosophy of mind, embodied and social cognition, and concept of selves, and of course body image, which is the main topic of our conference. And we are very as I said, very honored, and for us it's a privilege also because he has done such a long trip to come here today. So we are very happy. And I would like to just to remind you that he wrote more than 400 articles, and he wrote many books which have been translated into more than 20 languages. As you can see, these are his books. He's author of these books, all of them, and two of them are really about the body image, and and these are the books of which he is co-author. And again, some of them are really linked to our topic of today. So on a personal note, I would like also to let you know that Sean comes from the most romantic place in the world, which is Ireland, and in particular County Donegal, which is a fantastic place. If you don't know it, Paul Moore surely knows it because he's from Ireland as well. He will be our chair this afternoon. And it is a really fantastic place, and if you have the opportunity, may I recommend you to visit it. So, Sean, do you want to start?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me, and it's a real pleasure to be in Rome. Even in the winter, it's also cold where I come from. So, okay, yeah. So today I'm going to say some things about the body image, and I'm going to be guided a little bit by some references to a psychoanalyst and psychologist, Paul Schilder, and his work. This is an outline of what I'll be talking about. I'll introduce the ideas of the body image and how it is distinguished from the body schema. I'm going to argue for a conceptual distinction, although these concepts reflect two phenomena that are highly intertwined, let's say, in everyday practice and experience. Then I'll take a look at some of the work of Paul Schilder. Schilder's ultimate emphasis in the end is on a social dimension, and we'll try to widen the scope of his analysis a little bit to introduce social, cultural, and even economic factors. In the end, I'll try to, if I can get that far, I will try to give you something of a strategy for better defining the body image. So if you take a look at the literature on body image, you'll see that it's quite confused because it is oftentimes associated with another concept called the body schema. So there's a long tradition, approximately 135 years, of discussion of these terms, and they describe two things, really. Something about body awareness, being aware of one's body, and also things having to do with motor control. So you find discussions of this in neurology, in psychology, in psychoanalysis, but also in philosophy, my field. In phenomenology, people like Merleau-Ponty learn quite a bit from others, like Sir Henry Head in neurology, and from Paul Schilder in psychoanalysis and psychology. But one result of the confused terminology it motivates people to suggest that we get rid of that concept. The concept is so confused in the literature that it really misleads us. So there are different calls to abandon these terms and to substitute maybe with more neurological concepts. But there are also calls for conceptual clarification, and I tend to end on that side. So I've suggested a conceptual clarification between the concepts of body image and body schema, where I define a body image as a system of perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs pertaining to one's own body. Body schema, in contrast, is a system of sensory motor capacities that function without explicit awareness, and you don't have to perceptually monitor what you're doing. The body schema tends to take care of itself. It allows for fine motor control and for locomotion, for postural adjustments and so forth on its own without anything like conscious monitoring being necessary. So the two concepts here are distinguished. One has to do with body awareness, the body image, and the other has to do with the body schema, where we're really talking here about motor control processes. So this is a distinction between having a perception or belief or a feeling about one's own body and having a capacity to move and to control one's movement. So these are, I think, conceptually quite distinct things. Despite that, despite the fact that you can make a clear and empirically founded distinction, there is in fact a double dissociation possible. If you look at different cases such as unilateral neglect, where a schema might still be functioning perfectly well, but there are some problems with body image, or on the other side, looking at aproprioceptive deafferentation, where a patient might lose control, lose body schematic processes, but still maintain body image, and in fact, enhance body image in order for that person to be able to consciously control their movement. So there's a double dissociation that I think also justifies the conceptual distinction. But as I say, in contrast, in everyday actions and in clinical settings, body image and body schema are not easily distinguished. The body image can itself sometimes function in motor control, and you can have disruptions of body schematic processes that sometimes lead to body awareness. Likewise, there are overlaps in the neuronal processes that pertain to the role of proprioception and other sensory modalities that feed into our ability to control our movement and to be aware of our body as well. So in neuroscience, there are, people point to a variety of ways to conceive of these concepts in a neurological fashion. Dickerman and DeHaan, for example, point to two anatomical and functional neuronal systems that, and they identify two partly divided anatomical and functional systems that seem to be responsible for one or the other. The posterior parietal cortex for the immediate and automatic guidance of action, so that would be associated with the body schema, and the insula for conscious body perception, body image, where the insula seems to integrate a lot of different sensory processes. But this is not an absolutely clean neurological independence here. For example, there are also processes in the posterior parietal cortex that may also be involved in high-level visual, spatial, and semantic consciousness of the body. And there are other studies that show the insula is involved in sensory integration and motor control processes. So the neurological picture is not very clear. So introducing that distinction then I think sets us up to take a look at the specific work of Paul Schilder in the history of this concept. So Paul Schilder, who died in 1940, and we'll come back to that date looking at one of his very last essays. And he wrote a number of books starting in the 1920s in German, but also there was an important book in English called The Image and the Appearance of the Human Body. And one thing that we can sort of point to in Paul Schilder's work is a kind of terminological confusion. So here is a quote that I probably make too much use of. It's a quote from the book, published in 1935, The Image and the Appearance of the Human Body. And that's a book, by the way, that influenced a lot of people, including the phenomenologist Merleau-Ponty. So in the opening paragraphs, he gives a definition. He says, the image of the human body means the picture of our own body, which we form in our mind. That is to say, the way the body appears to ourselves. We call it a schema of our body, or a bodily schema, or following Head, which is Sir Henry Head, the postural model of the body. The body schema is the tridimensional image everybody has about himself, and we may call it body image. So what you can see here is that the two concepts are being used interchangeably. And he's referencing Head, who really focused on motor control processes. And specifically for Head, the body schema was precisely about posture and motor control, and not about anything like a picture of our body or an image or a representation that we are conscious of. So, should we blame Schilder for the terminological confusion that permeates the literature here? And in fact, I have done so, noting that many psychologists were influenced by Schilder, and that confusion really continued through the literature, and I could point to so many different examples of that, which I'm not going to. On the other hand, Emmanuel de Saint-Aubert, in a book that he published a few years ago, defended Schilder, suggesting that his work is rather, is richer than what I've noted about the confused terminology. And it's possible that we may be trying to read back into Schilder a stricter distinction than he would actually allow. He might, in fact, take these two concepts to be intertwined, and they are, in a way, in, as I mentioned, our everyday existence. But long before any of this, Klaus Conrad, in 1933, so therefore before the publication of Paul Schilder's book that we just referenced, noted and seriously objected to the confused use of these terms in numerous works, but especially in Schilder's 1923 book in German. Despite that, Schilder, you might say, did not clean up his act, and the confusion continued in his main work, the 1935 book on the image. So, at least in some sense, Schilder could have been more clear in his writings on this. But I think the important thing is that we can set that whole question about terminological confusion aside and consider many of the very positive and insightful observations that he makes about body image in his work. So in his work, you find rich discussions of the phantom limb, somatoparaphrenia following stroke, finger agnosia, unilateral neglect, apraxia, including some comments on Gleb and Goldstein's patient Schneider, who is later discussed in Merleau-Ponty and has an influence on the phenomenological literature here. He also attempts to identify connected areas of the brain through lesion studies in order to try to make some sense of these phenomena. His interpretation of some of these cases is supplemented by psychoanalysis. For example, he's associating the effects of the organic lesion connected with neglect with something, as he puts it, very similar to what we call in psychoanalysis a repression, and associating apraxic problems with obsessional neuroses. Of this association between neurological damage and psychoanalytic views, he goes on to discuss narcissism, hysteria, exhibitionism, and so forth, all of which are marked out on the body image. Concerning all of this, he says, I wish only to emphasize the fact that these problems of postural model, the body image, reach very far, go very deep, I think, and are problems which are as well problems of organic neurology as problems of the structure of the whole body and problems of the psychoneuroses. In the book, Image and Appearance of the Human Body, he goes deeper into the neurophysiological, the libidinous structure, and the unconscious factors pertaining to body image that require a psychoanalytic model discussing various pathologies. Here are a few principles that you find when you read this book. The body image is, he says, not the sum of optic, kinesthetic, and tactile sensations. It's the integration of those. So it's a complex phenomenon. Also, the body image is not given in a static way. It's something that involves a dynamic integration. He writes, most of the parts of the body have a very blurred and indefinite surface, and only where the body touches the external world do we get a clearer perception of our body. So the idea that the body is closely connected with the environment, and in fact, the environment plays some role in the formation of the body image, I think is an important idea to take from Schilder. He also discusses how parts of the environment are incorporated into the body image and how the body image can extend when, for example, using tools. And this is very early, 1935. Since that time, there have been many experiments that show precisely that idea, that our body image or body schema extends into the type of tools and the technologies that we use. But I think it's here that we can start to think about the social factors that impinge upon the body image. So despite my complaints about Schilder's terminological confusion, I want to emphasize the fact that he was one of the very first to discuss social factors in regard to body image type phenomena. And as I put it in a previous publication, more than any other theorist, Schilder highlights the social dimension that permeates our bodily movements and body awareness. And I quote him, he says, "I am of the opinion that the desire to be seen, to be looked at, is as inborn as the desire to see." And he thinks that these desires then have something to do with the social, intersubjective aspects of our existence. And so he notes that infants start to experiment with the world, and they continue to do so in play situations, physically manipulating things. And this interaction with the environment builds up the experience of the infant's own body, or, as he puts it, the body image. And this it works as part of gaining a kind of gratification for the infant. So he writes, "The infant has to experiment in a social way in order to get this gratification. Gratification and security come to the child chiefly through adults who take care of him. In these contexts, the social factor is paramount." The gratifications are physical, emotional, sexual, in the basic Freudian sense, and cognitive. Disruptions in gratifications can scar an individual's development. Neurosis is, he calls it, a wrong attitude, the result of an interruption of the process of testing and probing and experimenting with the environment, and specifically the social environment, a process, he says, guided by relations to other people. Here's a quote from an article in 1937. He writes, "Deprivation of food and love and encroachment into the bodily integrity, including erotic aggressiveness, are the two fundamental dangers for the child. Both might provoke definite wrong attitudes of the child, an attitude of withdrawing and giving up with an incomplete mastery of the situation, or an attitude of blind aggression. The attitude of the parents lays, therefore, the groundwork for the social adaptation. The child who is badly adapted from a social point of view will be a continuous element of disorganization of society, which, after all, consists of individuals." Schilder also acknowledges the process from the larger perspective of society, where one can see that a disorganized society can loop back to cause problems for the individual. And so he writes quite a bit about this. Here, for example, he says, "Such a disorganized society will provoke personality distortions in the single individual, who either does not understand the threat and answers with increased counter-aggression, or is hindered by the threat in his own development." Schilder here proposes what he calls a social therapy to address social neurosis. Today, we sometimes refer to these things as social pathologies. And at this point, the therapy that he is talking about and describing is very individualized and also quite cognitive, or what you might say, intellectual, where he addresses, quote, the wrong ideologies concerning sex, morals, and other attitudes. But he's thinking of these ideologies as existing in the individual. So this is a therapy that would address, as he puts it, the incomplete understanding of the meaning of words and the substitutions of vague general connotations and phrases for the observation of situations and facts. This is the deepest meaning of psychoanalytic procedure and similar processes which have originated from psychoanalysis. So Schilder is focusing here on treating the individual's understanding of their own words and ideologies, although he indicates that this understanding is not just intellectual, but also has an emotional basis. It is, however, very focused on the individual. We can note, by the way, that Schilder, by this time, had left Vienna and was practicing psychiatry and group therapy in New York at Bellevue Hospital. I note that because around this time, of course, 1938, things are happening in Germany. He had to leave. And I thought maybe that perhaps his focus on ideologies, that concept of ideology, might be connected with those kinds of events. He says, the analysis of the destructive and depriving ideology on the basis of what we know through the analysis of the individual is one of the paramount tasks. Those who fail in this respect should be relentlessly forced to gain insight into the genesis of their ideologies. This procedure, according to the optimistic belief of psychoanalysis, should imply the cure of the individual who has contributed to the disorganization of society. So it's clear that Schilder wants to open the way to a therapy that takes social factors into consideration, but he does remain focused on the individual's wrong understanding or faulty judgment or a lack of insight. These are the words he uses, and really focused on what we might call personal ideologies. We could ask how consistent this is with his definition of psychoanalysis, which, as he puts it in his 1935 book, he says, psychoanalysis is the science of the reflection of the world and of life in the body of the individual. I want to widen the scope with respect to the body image here and to talk about social, cultural, and economic factors that are sort of wider than the kind of scope that Paul Schilder was focused on. And we can get there by taking a look at an essay he wrote in 1940, which is the year he died. This was published in October. I believe he died in December. And the title of the essay is The Psychoanalysis of Economics. So in his essay, he represents, I think his essay represents a change from his earlier work in the image and appearance of the body, where although one of his main points focused on the social nature of the body image, the social was really equated with more immediate intersubjective, you might say dyadic or family-related type of relations. And this was primarily a psychological analysis that he was giving us. In contrast, in his essay, Psychoanalysis of Economics, he starts to consider more closely the effects of broader social economic arrangements on our individual actions and on our intersubjective interactions. Although in his article he does not link the body image itself to this theme, this, I think, is a link that has, I think, potentially direct relevance to some recent work in the area of what some people are calling embodied economics, or 4E economics. This is work I've been involved in, and Vittorio also has been contributing to this as well. So I've tried to develop the notion of a cognitive institution. I won't try to sort of explain precisely what that means, but the background to this type of development really comes from Hegel, and specifically Hegel's notion of objective spirit, plus some very recent work on extended cognition in the philosophy of mind. Now, Schilder could not have been familiar with the notion of extended mind. It came later than his work. But he does discuss Hegel's objective spirit, and he engages with that concept in his 1940 article. Schilder cites Hegel, and he says, "We deal here with the objective spirit of the German philosopher Hegel. Hegel did not think that the cultural achievements are merely the results of actions of human beings in the external world, but believed in a creative spirit which manifests itself according to its own laws in the different forms of cultural achievement." Now, the concept of objective spirit in Hegel is not as mysterious as Schilder sort of puts it here, having to do with the manifestation of spirit. I mean, you could put it in those terms, and people do, but in fact, it's a very concrete type of proposal that Hegel is making here. He's basically saying the social institutions that we create and the cultural practices that we engage in are, in a certain way, the externalization of our own mind. Right? So the idea, I think, in Hegel is very clear, and we don't really have to bring spirit into it, Geist, although he, of course, does. So what we're really talking about is the formation of institutions and the engagement in cultural practices that really are embodied actions on our part, and especially social interactions on our part. And the idea is that these institutions that we, in a certain way, create as a manifestation of what we are and what we're doing, loop back around and start to constrain our continuing embodied actions and interactions. So this is described in the contemporary literature as an enactive process. We enact these institutions, and by enacting these institutions, we also enact ourselves. There are these looping effects from the objective institutions that we set up in society. They loop back in and start to shape our own actions and interactions. And in terms of how it applies to economics, we can think of a market precisely as this kind of institution that we create, and that then takes on a kind of life of its own and loops back in and shapes the way we think about things. And Schilder himself talked precisely about these kind of market-related processes. He says in his essay, "We live in houses which are heated and we wear clothes. It is impossible to understand why people buy the kind of clothes they wear or the kind of house they buy, merely from the point of view of the psychology of the individual who purchases them. The suit bought by an individual is the result of an economic process, which in large parts is independent of the individual who purchases the suit. The suit which we wear has a share in the determination of our subsequent behavior. So I think he's pointing directly to the types of things we've been describing here that are, in fact, under discussion in contemporary literature. And here I think we can make the connection with the body image, because clothes have something to do with our appearance and how we think about ourselves. And here's a longish quote. I won't do the whole thing, but here's the way he's thinking. He's saying, we know that many attempts are made to change the body image. And in this respect, we must consider the psychology of clothes from this point of view. And at the bottom there, he says, we identify ourselves with others by means of clothes. We become like them. By imitating their clothes, we change our postural image of the body by taking over the postural image of others. So the role of clothing fits into this larger discussion of the body image at this point in his writings. In his 1940 essay, he's pointing to a more sociological analysis then. He says it has a decided social significance. Houses, apartments, jewelry, parties, traveling may be considered from a similar point of view. Due to our psychological attitudes, we change the outward world, and these changes have a lasting influence on our actions. They persist even when our psychological attitudes have changed. Again, Hegel's objective spirit is hovering in the background. It's the creation of these outward practices, these external institutions. It's the wearing of clothes in a certain way. It's the buying of houses and market processes and so forth that have an influence on our actions. In phenomenology, this is sometimes referred to as a process of sedimentation, where habits, rituals, traditions become embodied, and they start to shape our behaviors and our social interactions. Edmund Husserl, the phenomenologist, suggests that in this sedimentation process, such things sink rather than dissipate into the unconscious. They sink into the unconscious. They don't dissipate, they sink into the unconscious and remain there. What he calls the night of the sedimented. Sedimentation in the inconspicuous substratum, the unconsciousness. Schilder himself does not use the term sedimentation, but suggests that if a response proves valuable by giving gratification, it has a tendency to become fixated and lives almost its own life. So using that term sedimentation, we could say each sedimentation has, as Schilder says, not only such an influence upon the individual who created it, but also on any other individual who may come in contact with it. This is an influence which may even reach from one generation to another. So he's talking about rather large processes, social processes here. This is so much the case that, he suggests, we should not speak about single individuals, since no single individual exists. Individuals exist merely in groups, and they have similar problems and conflicts. So I think you can see that there's a kind of dramatic change in the way he's thinking from his 1935 book to the 1940 article. Schilder is now citing Marx, and he starts to treat ideology as something external to the individual, not something just that belongs to the individual. He says ideologies are almost a part of the outside world, in the same way as houses, streets, and sewers. They have arisen out of specific needs in relation to specific cultural conditions. In this regard, with respect to the connection between body image and social structure, Schilder was a forerunner of a number of theorists, some of them phenomenologists, and some of them social theorists, some of them psychologists and psychoanalysts like Frantz Fanon, who has a very nuanced interpretation with respect to racism. Pierre Bourdieu, the notion of habitus. Iris Marion Young, in her famous essay, Throwing Like a Girl, with respect to sexism. Susan Bordeaux, who writes quite a bit about body image and the cultural effects on our body image. And more recent critical phenomenologists who write about a lot of this stuff nowadays. The very last section here, I'll do this quickly. I want to conclude with a suggestion concerning how to conceive of the body image in all of this. As a recent review indicates, Satin and colleagues say, the notion of body image compared to that of body schema has aroused more controversy, and there is no single definition to date. So one might want to pursue this idea of trying to define it in more precise terms. The body image is typically thought of as a representation or a set of neuronal processes or a picture formed in our mind, as Schilder puts it. From the perspective of embodied and active cognition, this is a narrow, sort of in-the-head conception reflecting the strictly psychological approach taken by Schilder and others in Schilder's early work, at least, and doesn't reflect the 1940 essay, for example. But I think in that essay, Schilder also suggests a different definitional strategy. Schilder suggests that more is involved than neuronal representations or a picture in the head, since emotions, but also environmental incorporations, other people, and social cultural practices and institutions are really part of the larger picture. So in this respect, I suggest that when we could take what has been termed a pattern theoretic approach to the body image, and that this would be an appropriate way to start thinking about it. On this view, what a particular phenomenon, an emotion or a self or a cognitive scaffold is just a pattern composed of a dynamical set of relations between a variety of factors and processes, not all of which are essential or necessary, but some set of which are sufficient to constitute the phenomenon. So a body image just is a complex pattern of dynamically related processes, a dynamical gestalt that includes experiential processes pertaining to one's own body, so perceptions, a sense of ownership for one's body, a sense of agency for one's action, interoceptive and proprioceptive processes that form the awareness, emotional, affective feelings about one's own body, but also concepts, conceptions, ideas about the body drawn from, for example, folk notions or from science. And then we might also say there is at least some relation to body schematic processes having to do with posture and so forth. There are, of course, unconscious processes, intersubjective processes, and importantly, I think, social, cultural, normative practices and institutional effects that all come in to play a role in the formation of the body image. All of these can be reflected in both complex neuronal process and structures, and as well as in first-person narratives that might, in fact, be developed within clinical settings. So we can think of the body image as this kind of gestalt of different processes that enter into and shape our experience. We can highlight various processes in certain contexts. So in some contexts, the intersubjective processes might take the lead. In other processes, the larger social, cultural, normative factors or the institutional effects might be dominating for some individuals. And we can think that these are not simple, but rather are more complex, dynamically related processes. So saying something about intersubjective processes is also saying something about emotion and affect as it's experienced. We can think of then therapeutic interventions that might facilitate changing the whole gestalt by focusing on some specific manifest symptoms that may involve, for example, emotion, but an intervention on the emotional scale might have some effect also on intersubjective processes and the way the person is living in the environment. And that itself will change the whole dynamic of the gestalt. We might also have to, consider environmental interventions as well, changing some of the social and cultural practices that the patient or an individual is involved in this kind of therapy. So the aim of such therapies would be, of course, to increase flexibility in the body image pattern and to, of course, decrease the suffering. Okay, that's right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Sean, and it has been really interesting. And these last few slides brings us to the clinical dimension that we will treat tomorrow with a presentation of clinical cases. As we have a few minutes before starting with Rosa's presentation, is there any question from the audience? Is there someone who wants to say something? There is one person down there, I don't know the name. Please tell us your name and the country you come from.
My name is Saba Khodayarifat. I come from Vienna. Thank you very much for the wonderful lecture. I know this is
please speak a bit more loudly.
Yes. Is it okay now? Is it better?
Better.
Yes. I know this is a topic of its own, but could you just say a few words about the development of body schema and body image in childhood, in the first years?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you. Well, there's a lot of work, of course, on child development, and Schilder talks about it in his work as well. I think the importance of intersubjectivity from the very beginning of life is probably the central idea. Both, I think, Schilder and contemporary developmental theorists like Colin Trevarthen, who's just recently passed away, Peter Hobson, Vasu Reddy. There's a number of developmental psychologists who are focused very clearly on intersubjectivity as the kind of driving force of development. And one can, of course, understand that quite literally, that if an infant is not cared for, the infant doesn't survive. So that caring brings the infant into intersubjective relations very early, maybe even postnatally. The late-term fetus has a kind of interaction with the mother. And being born into a family means you're already born into certain cultural practices, and the family will engage in certain cultural practices that, of course, are shaped by the society that they live in. And this can be different from one culture to another, but maybe there are some very basic ones that stay the same because we are biological organisms. So our body schematic processes are also shaped by culture, the way we move, the kind of posture we take, and our relations with others shape the way we think of ourselves, including our body image. The behavior, our behavior may change from one cultural context to another, but it's very much shaped by the processes of that home, that family, that first circumstance that we're born into. Later, we can, of course, adopt other practices as we encounter other people, but only as we encounter other people. And again, the intersubjective plays a big role. I think what I'm saying is kind of quite obvious. I'm not sure I'm giving you any kind of insight here, but I think there's so much work that's been done, empirical work, that shows that this is, in fact, is the case, that hopefully it is obvious to all of us these days. So I hope that at least addresses, yeah.
And thank you. And we have time for another question from the audience. Yes? Please tell us your name and where you come from.
Yes, my name is Tracy Morgan. I come from New York City. And I was noticing in this discussion the split between sort of image and schema. And I found myself quite interested in the idea of like a disciplinary discussion, a discussion within the discipline that shows us, it struck me as there was sort of like, it's this or it's that, it's this or it's that. Is it right to use image? Is it right to use schema? I was wondering if you could tell us, or what your thoughts are, if we look at this as sort of an obsessional way of thinking, what is it containing? What is the symptom? And what is and what can't be expressed? What's being held back by this kind of a conversation? Is it image? Is it schema? And, you know, give it a shot.
Yeah, good, good question. It's been pointed out a number of times that that distinction between body image, body schema is not meant to explain everything. Right? There's so much more going on, and we've talked about some of that today. But it is a kind of very basic distinction. As I say, it works very nicely conceptually, and you can find empirical evidence to make the distinction. But at the same time, in our everyday life, as we move around the world and gesture and talk with one another, our body schema and body image are intertwined in some fashion. So that distinction may be fruitful in some circumstances. Let's say if we're organizing experiments in psychology or neuroscience, but it might not be as clinically useful as other things. In the clinic, I think you get a much richer phenomenon that you have to analyze and understand, and to be able to maybe keep that distinction in mind and say, yes, there are certain postural indications that might inform us about the person's attitude. That's interesting, and motor control processes are, of course, working all the time in terms of our posture and movement and all of that. But maybe the body image is more relevant for us in terms of trying to understand the person's experience and how they feel about themselves. So I think it's a useful distinction in certain contexts, and in other contexts not as useful, but nonetheless it gives us some kind of indication and some kind of useful tool to start making sense of individuals' behaviors.
So thank you for your question, and maybe we have time for one more.
So I'm Yasmin from Belgium, and I wondered how can we practically introduce and define these two distinctions towards our clients, as to be like more, like in everyday therapy, for example, how it can help.
The question is whether we could use these distinctions and explain them to your patients?
I suppose, yeah.
Yeah.
Like theoretically, it is really interesting, but practically, how it can be interesting. And I'm
right.
sorry,
Yeah. I think, I'm not quite sure. I never thought about whether one could, in that kind of setting, explain, here are some concepts. But I think to start to differentiate between how I might be feeling about something as opposed to the way I look. So sometimes I might be excited about something, I might be happy about something, but not really show it in the way my body appears. And other people can sort of call that to my attention. In the same way that, I might be angry at something and not really realize it. And somebody might say, "Why are you so angry?" And suddenly I realize that I'm angry. So it might be important to, for example, if part of what you want to do is reinforce the other person's agency, it might be important to point out to them that they seem to be very capable in terms of what they're able to do. Their movements, their postures are really positive, and that allows them to appear also to be in a very positive way, which I think that kind of positive reinforcement, I think you're all better at that kind of thing than I would be in your practices. That can't help but maybe improve their sense of agency for their own life.
Okay, thank you very much, but don't worry, there will be much more time for the discussion later after Rosa's presentation. So now let's go on with our second presentation of this morning. Rosa also doesn't need a big presentation. Many of you already know her. And yes, you can read what she has done in her past, but puoi andare a quella dopo? I would like only to present books. Yes, her books and quella dopo, yes. So building bridges and the dynamic self in psychoanalysis. And there are books written, and now she's preparing a new one, which will come soon. It will be published quite soon. So, about what? It's a secret. It's a secret. So now, Rosa, go on.
I have my notes, I said, because I can talk until tomorrow. Please stop me after 30 minutes. Okay. This is a really challenging topic to me. So let's start with some points we agree on. The agreement is on this. No one of us would doubt that our body is always with us. At this moment I'm speaking to you, I'm not focused on my body, I'm focused on what I'm going to say to you, but my body speaks to the world about me, and speaks to the world about me, my gestures, with my gesture, mimicry, attitudes, and the body is always present in the so-called language, metaphorical language. The body, the embodiment of the body, or the embodiment of the language is in the metaphoric, like in the metaphor, like up, down, behind, in front of. There are body, they convey body dimension, and at the same time they convey a language dimension. So the body is always with us. This is the first point of agreement, is always with us. Obviously, in case of disembodiment of out-of-body experiences, we are is different. No? Okay, I go with this. So, second point of agreement. The architecture of the body determines our knowledge. What I mean? Having eyes, hands, legs, and other parts of the body configured with these shapes, configured in this way, determines the kind of knowledge we have of the world. And this uniqueness, physical features of our body, and together with the environment with which we interact, at the same time, both the interaction with the world and the body with these features, with these shapes, allow us to have this sort of knowledge, cognitive and affective knowledge of the world. And we call, Varela called this situated living body. 2 points of agreement, so embodiment, about embodied. Embodiment is used firstly for 2 points. Cognition depends on the kind of experience that comes from having these different, various sensory motor capacities, and secondly, these sensory motor capacity are also inclusive in a wider biological context. So, I'm going to talk about self-image. Self-image like the way a person perceives or thinks about themselves, or the 6th dimension of a person's self-image, like in psychoanalysis we know we have a lot of literature about self-image. I'm not going to talk about self-image. I'm going to talk about the so-called homunculus, the organization of the body in some primary cortices, somatomotor cortices. No, I'm not going to talk about this organization of the body in the cortex. Obviously, I'm going to cross the concept of body schema and body image, just Gallagher said. So, if you take a look at this picture highlights the region of interest, just a few regions of interest. This is Damasio and Airuku, I think, okay, a name. And so these are just a few regions of interest about bodily sensation, where we can find in some psychological experiment, neuropsychological experiment, all these regions are involved in registering bodily sensations. So you can see how much complex is this geography of the brain. And those are just a few. Just the regions, the region of interest, memory, body-related regions, cortical midline structure, and other so-called, then I am going on this better, so-called interoception and exteroception. So you can see there how complex is to know where the body, the inscription of the body is in the brain. So usually, if another complexity, if we consider the bodily root of this sensation, the bodily root of the self, the situation is more and more complicated. And because we should consider now, today, I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm a clinician, so they investigated this bodily root of the self, okay, by investigating by self-related states. Self-related states means verbal and non-verbal self-related states. Non-verbal self-related states is the bodily root of the self. And this is not just interoceptions. And in this case, when we investigate this bodily root of the self, we need to investigate at the same time the overlapping between self-related states and other related states. I call this, in this relationship, self-other-world relation. Okay, including a wider context, the world. In this case, when we talk about this bodily root, we should consider the nestedness of the self, I'm going to this next, and the overlapping between self-related states and other related states. This is, so, the first question is, you know, every year I say to you, and I answer to you, to help us to give answer to some questions. This year the question is, firstly, how many bodies we have in the brain? how many representations, how many bodies we have in the brain. Second question says, what happens when the body enters the scene? What happens? So we can see the body as egocentric or pericentric compared to the space. We can see the body as a subject or object. So in any case, according to me, I would like to consider this schema from self-related states and other related states in building body image. In this process, we meet the verbal and non-verbal self-related processing, and at least in this domain, self-related states, at least we meet other three domains: interoception, exteroception, and introspection. At the end of this overlapping and nested-ness, we find the body image. So I don't have the time to investigate all these domains, okay? Just I would like to stress, to highlight the interoceptions domain, okay? Usually, we think at this multisensory integration. Okay, we think at multisensory integration like this picture: exteroceptive processing, interoceptive processing, some regions. Okay, then interact somewhere, and we have this multisensory integration, and then they convey all this product to the cortex. At the end, we have something. This product. Too simple to be true. Too simple. In this very Manos Sakiris wrote this just to show you one point. Okay, just to show you this. Multisensory integration is in interaction with internal body models. Internal body models can actually manipulate important physical and psychological aspects of the self and changing both body and mind. Okay, this was Manos Sakiris decades ago. Now it's changed something. Okay, here we find the magical word, internal body models. What does it mean? If we have a lot of body in the brain, which one we are talking about? And this is a very strong problem. For this reason, I said too simple to be true. But if you want to know more about multisensory integration today, so multisensory integration starting from the concept of interoception. So interoception is the body-brain axis of sensations originating from the internal body and these visceral organs that signals their physical or psychological state. This was the first definition of interoception. If you want to know more, please read this meta-review. It's a meta-analysis. It's a meta-review from Paul Frewen. And it's really interesting in a nutshell, okay? In a nutshell, according to me, my reading of him, he said, the integration of bodily signals into different brain structures involves many areas. I showed you the region of interest, but we have a lot of this, including primary sensory areas and higher order association. But in this review, in this meta-review, but missing from this list, these researches, are the insula, the medial prefrontal cortex, and the anterior cingulate cortex. These regions are prominent in many other studies and research on cardiac signals. That means on interoceptions. So they suggest, Frewen suggests, this is a simplistic way to think of the interoceptions. The term interoception is misleading if we consider we expand this to include other sensoriality, okay, like visual sensory and many others. according to if we include non-verbal self-related processing, we cannot talk only about interoception. Is a concept more vast than simply speaking about interoception. And I'm interested in this meta review. I'm interested just in this point. They say keynotes unique for the interoceptive system include, at least, or should include insula and premotor cortex. And keynotes unique for the interoceptive system include at least posterior cortex and part of the temporoparietal junction. So they said a node that the node that overlaps both systems, facilitating their co-modulation and co-balancing, likely should include the intraparietal sulcus. I'm not interested in intraparietal sulcus, obviously. I'm saying this just to show you the overlapping region are really important in this processing of verbal non-verbal states of the self. I'm interested in this region of overlapping. And another question. So we can think of multisensory integration as a bottom-up mechanism or a top-down predictive coding, top-down mechanism. It's okay, but we have another problem, another question. We don't have any sensory channel to register the body as a whole. We don't have any sensory channel who can register the body in the brain as a whole. We can register parts of the body, but we don't have a sensory channel for all the body as a whole. That means, again, top-down process or bottom-up process doesn't integrate the body in the brain in order to construct body image. We need more. And if we consider the context around us, and we should consider the context around us, the context in we living on, we are situated the living body, so like the peripersonal space, the situation becomes more and more complicated. Just take a look at this picture. Just, you don't need to know the brain, the geography of the brain. Just take a look, and you can see there the different response between verbal self-related processing and non-verbal self-related processing. The areas, the regions are different. Red yellow is different from left to right picture. And if you consider this simplest than the previous one, the red-yellow color involves is the interoceptions, the regions involved with interoception. I sum in order to stay in my time. And the blue color, the blue are the areas of the exteroceptions. So you can see there are interoceptions and exteroceptions means different area. And so when we talk about non-verbal bodily self-related states, we are talking about what? We are not talking only about the body of the interior, of the inside. It's a wider concept. And if you take a look at the picture on my right, and on your right, okay, and you can see there the areas involved in body ownership. Body ownership, Gallagher is teaching this. Body ownership means manliness, my body, this is my body, okay? Body ownership involves the red regions, okay? red regions means body ownership. We have a lot of literature, Olaf Blank, many other on this. And then you can see in this light blue, you can see the regions involved in interoceptions. Different, totally different. And only the yellow region is the overlapping between body ownership and interoceptions. So please don't say bodily self, core self means interoception. Interoception is a part of this processing. And again, overlapping. If we consider the overlapping between verbal self-related processing, resting states, and non-verbal self-related processing, we can find there are different regions and the area of overlapping. So for this reason, I said to you, I'm interested in this overlapping, not in the single regions. If we want to say something, to have a better knowledge about how we build our body image. And so multisensory integration, I just said something about multisensory integration. This is just one domain, okay, of this processing, self-processing. Multisensory integration, according to me, is a process through which a new representational product is developed. New representational product means when the overlapping is there in some regions, at the end we cannot find the single part of our sensory channel involved. It's a new product. And the registration of this new product is different from all of us. And the north of growth is rather a matter of their balance, overlapping, multisensory integration, and the degree to which one predominates over the others. It's not only questions of top-down or bottom-up processing. Is this overlapping? Is this co-modulation? Is this co-balancing we are interested at? This is the nestedness of the self. Maybe Scalabrini will say something this afternoon. But nestedness, we need to approach nestedness thinking of overlapping. That means in my mental self-processing, verbal self-processing, always, for our clinician is really important, always I found something about interoceptions and exteroception. We cannot divide mental self from exteroceptive self, from interoceptive self. No, this the overlapping at the end is our self. And why I'm interested in this overlapping and steadiness? Because, according to me, they form a choreographic dance between inside and outside in image making. Damasio, Tarns really helping, supportive here. He said, the human brain is a born cartographer, and the cartography began with the mapping of the body inside which the brain sits. Having eyes, hands in these shapes is with the brain sits. But remember, brain maps are mercurial, changing from moment to moment to reflect the changes that are happening in the neurons that feed them, and which in turn reflect the changes in the interior of our body and in the world around us. It's a mercurial changing. So, new questions. Does the image of the body have its own conformation? First. Secondly, is it an object? Third, Does it have an absolute structure that is independent of the way it relates to all the domains mentioned above? The eggs, the body, and the image, the match. If we consider all these experiments, rubber and illusion, phantom limb mirror box, enhancement illusion, full body illusion, and many other, they show us what? We can have a sensation referred to a false limb. The limb is not there, no representation of this limb, but we can perceive this limb. This experiment caused a recalibration of the perceived position of the body in the space. Different perceived position, but I'm here. But I can perceive my body in different position and, above all, influencing what the subject believes to be a possible part of their body. And rubber illusion. This is not my hand, but I think this is my hand. So means mercurial changing in our body image and body image. Okay. Anorexic patient, vigorexic, say in English, vigorexic patients. So which kind of match we can find there? This is my patients. Ex former anorexia, now no eating disorder, no disturbed relationship, normal good sexual relationship, normal good student life, but after many sessions, no eating disorder now, okay, after many sessions, looking at this picture, she said to me, I know what we are saying for many years. I know, doctor, I know what we are saying, and I understand it. But if my neurons say, I'm like this in the mirror, my neuron is always right. Because this is my neuron. I don't have another neuron who says to my neuron, please, this is not you. This in the mirror is not self-image. It's not the objectification of my image. This is me. Because my neuron sees me like this in the mirror. So, why? We said a lot of experiments say we have this unchangeable, changeable body image. Why? In some disorder, like vigorexics, like eating disorder and so on, why we have this, we find this sort of unchangeable body image? It's really a strong rock of the therapy to change this. Because of stop updating the new literature, say there is a stop updating of our body image, so they stay at the body image of I don't know when and where. So stop updating means out of body experience. Some last studies research, according to me, no. Out of body experience, it's like disembodiment, it's like autoscopy, is not the case. This is not the case. It's a sort of stop updating the objectification of the body image, so I stay stuck at this body image, maybe, but I don't think my presence is, this is me. My neuron says, this is me, it's not objectification. So, maybe the body size is an impairment in body size. We have now some full body illusion experiments on body size, but the anorexic doesn't change their body image in this case of this experiment. Doesn't change. So it's not the body size the problem. Is the problem with the matching between one's own body and that of the caregiver in early childhood, attachment, touching, visual, sensory, how my mother touched me? Maybe yes, maybe no, we don't know. Is a stop to self-plasticity by abnormal steadiness? That means abnormal overlapping? Maybe yes. Surely, it is certainly an arrest of multisensory integration at some level. Top-down means active predictive coding. Stop updating this. Bottom-up means perceptual predictive coding. Stop updating this. It's sure we have this stop updating somewhere that does not allow stimuli to be, according to my interpretation of multisensory integration, to be reinterpreted and recombined through all this sensorial channel through new feedback. This is why the same image always emerges recurrently. Stop.
So, we are now starting our audience discussion, and first of all, I would like to say good morning to all the people who are following us by Zoom, and to remind them that they can make questions on the chat, and on the chat either in English or in Italian, and all questions will be welcome, and we will try to answer all of them. And please specify in your questions if the question is for Shaun or for Rosa. So we can now start, and please let me know if there are questions from the audience. So while you think, I have my personal question to Shaun. I would like to ask you, in the last book you are co-editor, the one which is Body Schema and Body Image New Direction. In one of the last chapters, I think from Ataria, it says that in eating disorder, in anorexia, there is a decrease of ownership and an increase of agency. A psychoanalyst would say that the superego is increased, is very rigid, is very tough, and there is a tendency to obsessive behavior. Could you tell us something more about this balance between ownership and agency, and how it is altered in some disorders, like in eating disorders?
Okay, thank you. So, if we think of obsessive behavior, generally speaking, one can think of it in terms of the concept of the sense of agency, and one could think of it narrowly as increasing or intensifying a sense of agency for controlling certain aspects of one's life. But at the same time, it's a bit of a paradox, I think, because at the same time, you can think of it as losing a sense of agency for much more of your life. And so you might feel trapped. You might feel that, in fact, you cannot stop. Although you might be wanting to stop, you might have a desire to stop doing this behavior, and yet you can't. So in that sense, the sense of agency is diminished. So in terms of ownership, yeah, in anorexia, I mean, the idea of looking in the mirror and having a sense of ownership for what you see, I think is very also an interesting question to ask. And probably you all are more in a position to answer that question than I am as a theoretical philosopher. But I would think definitely something about the sense of ownership would be at stake on whether or not you can identify with what you see. And there is in philosophy a distinction between first order and second order volitions. So there's a philosopher named Harry Frankfurt that makes this distinction. And it has to do with agency, and I think it also has to do with ownership. To the extent that you can have a second-order reflection and examine your experience from that perspective, you can then sort of be in a position to say whether or not you identify with your first-order types of desires. So addicts, if you're addicted to one thing or another, you often feel like you're out of control. But that feeling of being out of control also can motivate a reflective attempt to gain control over your desires and your life. So I think it's a good question, and it's very complex, but it may differ from one person to another as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And now let's see if there are questions from the audience and from the chat.
Go.
My name is Marcel Schmeets. I'm from Holland. And I need a bit of time to introduce my question, so if you allow me. It was what Rosa said at the beginning, which triggered me. None of us would doubt that our body is always with us. And that made me remember the article of Donald Winnicott, the very first in 1945. And he wrote that at the age of 49, after studying extensively mother and baby units and interaction, and which is also very important, analyzing 12 psychotic patients. So in this wonderful article, he brings in what he works further on in his 26-year career, the idea of the building up of the mind, which is his most proper topic. And he says the very first task is integration, of course, getting a unit, being a unit, then personalization, and then realization, which has to do with space and time. So the first point I would like to make is that he, in that article, says that one of his patients had the feeling that he was actually in the body of another person. So there are circumstances in which we are not in our body. And for Winnicott, dissociation is one of the aspects in which we can remember something which must have happened when we were very small, and those of us who are unfortunate are experiencing in real life being psychotic. That's one point. The other point is that personalization for Winnicott, it seems to me that's the other way around. For him, it's the placement of the self into the body and not getting the ownership of the body. And that's a process which is highly influenced by the mother and the interactions and even the environment. So could it also not be right to look coming from the other side, placing the self, the feeling of self, in the body? That's my second point.
Okay, these are two different questions. The first one is you are talking Winnicott. You are talking about disembodiment, and the second question is another different question. Is Winnicott models on body-mind integrations. So consider this. You are talking about Winnicott models. We are not talking about Winnicott model. I'm not talking about Winnicott model for two reasons. Because according to me, there is no body and self separations, and then the self is being integrated in the body. Body and self go together. First. Second, so it's a different model. If you want, we can talk about this. About the disembodiment, it's really interesting from Winnicott point of view or other point of view. I highlighted this in the first chapter of my books, The Dynamic Self, because I had the patients like this. And then in this chapter, you never find the word dissociation. You never. Why? Because we need to think about what dissociation is, and in which model we are when we talk about dissociation. Today, we talk about disembodiment, out-of-body experience. We know a lot of these features, the regions involved in a different way, if you are out of body experience, if it's a double experience, if you see yourself in another body, if you see yourself in another space, or you need to consider. So for this reason, I said we cannot think of this in Winnicott terms. So you can consider in this case the first, second person perspective. The first person perspective is here with my body or is there. This changes everything in psychotic patients or in whatever patients. Where is the first person perspective when the body is dislocated in another space? Or maybe we have the double first person perspective. This is me, ownership. This is me talking, but I'm not seeing me here. I'm there, but this is not me. First person perspective, where is? And just to conclude, but it's a very, very long history about Winnicott. Just to conclude, if in this case, okay, when I talk about self-consciousness, okay, from the self-ownership, self-agency, minimal self, and then self-related states. And in this case, I don't know if when we talk about dissociation, just to say, we are talking about something unconscious, or in case of disembodiment, we are talking about consciousness dissociation. I'm here, I'm there. This is an impairment in self-consciousness. According to me, not to Winnicott.
May I add one little thing to your question? I think as psychoanalysts, we are all very grateful to Winnicott for everything he wrote. I mean, he was a fantastic author, but nowadays, as neuropsychoanalysts, it's very hard for us to think in terms of a split between body and mind, but we think of the unit, mind, brain, body. So something related to, so the mind goes into the body and so on. It's nowadays not anymore updated, let's say. Would you like to add something?
Oh, yeah, there's one thing about Winnicott's work that in terms of how we understand from the very beginning, how we are related to others. I mean, he talks about a kind of fusion, right? The mother-child kind of relationship is a type of fusion at first, and then there has to be a kind of a struggle to differentiate ourselves, and then we come into ourself. We get a self at that point. And so I mentioned in response to another question a number of developmental psychologists, Trevarthen, Lasse Reddy, and Peter Hobson, and there are a lot of others, Andrew Maltzoff as well. There's a lot of more recent developmental psychology that basically sort of takes issue with that idea of fusion. And they would point to evidence that suggests that there's a differentiation between self and other from the very beginning. It starts even prenatally. And that's the beginning point where you have to start. And so then that means, and to put this more in the phenomenological terms, that means that the sense of ownership is there from the very beginning. And what you have to explain is how you can lose that, right? I think that's a very interesting question, and it can happen in schizophrenia, right, and depersonalization type syndromes, that you lose a sense of ownership for your body. That seems quite possible. It could go the other way too, that you could start to incorporate more than you ought to into your body. But again, there's a huge literature on that, and I'm not sure I can take a position and say definitively in any way. I think it would really depend on the case and on the type of condition we're talking about. How one could put the challenge to explain how we could lose that sense of ownership.
Thank you very much. And who wants to ask something to our speakers, to our distinguished speakers?
You can ask me anything about Hegel if you want.
It is a question and a remark.
Please tell you your name, Irit.
Oh. Nobody knows. Irit Rave from Israel. It is a question and a remark to the dissociation. We look a bit different now, with Friston understanding. So when you say dissociation, I think it is regarded as the emotional defense mechanism, trying to take off a too muchness of feeling that could be burdening, and then you dissociate ego practices, not conscious practices. So we do have, there is no question about the self, and as we say it, but I wonder about this dissociation that you just canceled, and I find myself trying to dissociate from several items in my brain that hold some heavy load of emotions, just in order to be concentrating what we are doing now. So I wonder, what would you say about that?
I agree with you also, because when we talk about the split of the mind or split from body and mind, it's not simply questions about only consciousness or unconscious systems. Sometimes this involves the emotional systems, okay? In this case, we have a lot of literature on anhedonia. We don't know how to express our emotion, but if we consider just one thing on emotional system, just one thing in the self-consciousness, if we think what Punks, the neuroscience, affective neuroscience, said on the part of the emotion is always conscious, okay? The emotion is always conscious. So we always feel our emotion. We cannot call emotion something we cannot feel, okay? So in this case, it's really us, the emotion is something we feel. There is no, it's okay. So at this point, is really hard to me to understand what dissociation is. In this case, usually we think of the feeling, okay, the emotional system, the emotions. We think of some sort of splitting between emotion, what I'm feeling, and mind, mentalization. So I don't know, because sometimes we feel we know what we are feeling. Maybe we don't know why we are feeling this. We don't know the name of this feeling, but we feel this in our body. So I don't know where the dissociation is. To me, this is very, very hard to understand. Just this.
There was an answer here. You have an answer.
Yes, thank you very much.
I'm sorry. I feel that what Rita is talking about is a kind of conscious compartmentalization as opposed to dissociation. But correct me if I'm wrong, please.
Yeah, I just didn't want to leave it out. So I said it so that we have it in mind. Paul, you think something?
And then Paul.
Yeah.
I have another question.
Okay.
Thanks. Really a question for Sean, but I'm interested in what everyone else thinks as well.
Paul, speak slowly.
Thank you.
Every time we have this problem with you.
Okay. Yes, sorry. Paul Moore from Ireland. My question, Sean, is about, I was very interested in that idea of extended cognition and embodiment, embodied economics, I think the term was, and the idea that I suppose our cultural experiences, our languages, our societies, our institutions, our ideologies are artifacts of ourselves at some stage. And then you talked about that looping back and how that you can almost imagine a culture or a people developing over long periods of time, and that reinforcing and maybe kind of supporting the identification of a group of people. So I was curious to hear what you might have to say about what happens when that's interrupted, in the sense maybe of colonialism. So we're very interested in that in Ireland. In our neuropsychoanalytic society, what happens when another ideology, another culture, another society comes in and interrupts that process? Just very interested in your thoughts and ideas about that.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that's a good question. My parents emigrated from Ireland to the U.S. And, well, some people talk about culture shock, and it could be that. But definitely immigration would be a good thing to think about here. Colonization as well. I mean, that sort of one culture invades another, or in immigration you change from one culture to another, and that definitely has to have some kind of effect on you. And some people can cope with that very easily, and others can't. There's that curious thing that happens, that there's been studies showing that it's the first generation that can experience higher instances of schizophrenia, for example. The first, not the people who actually do the immigration, because maybe they can hold on to some of the old country's culture, and that can help them cope with what they have to experience in a new culture. But maybe, yeah, I don't know, the first generation you would think who are being brought up in that new culture, and maybe they have some kind of tensions that are almost inexplicable in terms of how they can or cannot cope with that. Yeah, so in any case, these are definitely issues that pertain to this concept of extended cognition, the fact that the environment will play a large role in how we are able to think and to cope and to behave, and oftentimes it's very positive. It's in the philosophy, the philosophical discussion is often a very positive thing, that these are, the environment can scaffold your cognitive abilities, and you can solve problems, and this is all good. But then I think what philosophers sometimes ignore is, how changes in the environment can, in fact, start to distort and lead to social pathologies and so forth. And I think a lot more thought should go into that. From speaking as a philosopher, I should think more about that myself. Yeah.
May I add something at this, just to say, I usually take in my mind in the different compartments, okay, the model of extended cognition and the model of situated living system. So, just because I would like to ask you maybe to say something about this, it's not easy. Just because in the extended cognition, there is a sort, according to me, what I understand about this, there is a sort of panpsychism. The cognitive is everywhere. And so maybe we lose the concept of the importance of the mind, the body, to be situated there. So just for this, I have some difficulty to understand the extended cognition.
Yeah, there's a problem that's usually called the problem of cognitive bloat. It's the people who are proponents of extended cognition talk about how the mind is extended into the environment, incorporating certain aspects of the environment in order to scaffold our cognitive abilities. And they have trouble drawing then the boundary of the mind. So in contrast to the traditional idea that the mind is totally in the head, they're saying, no, it's out here in the environment as well. And then, what about the boundary of the mind? And this becomes an objection to the extended mind people. So how do you answer that? And well, there are a number of different attempts to answer that problem. And one is that the mind extends, but only when you are engaged with the environment. When you are an agent who is coupled to the environment in the right way, that's when the extension happens. And otherwise, it doesn't necessarily happen. So you can limit you can impose limits on the possibility of extended mind by thinking about agentive engagement with the environment, and that introduces some kind of limitation there.
And we can consider this an activism?
So yeah, the inactive story talks about that kind of agentive engagement as being the thing that constitutes and even allows for anything like extension to happen.
Yes, my name is Francesco Castellet. I'm a psychoanalyst from Rome and co-founder as well. And my question could regard both of you. Is more general in a sense. For example, the term overlapping, that is very useful to a certain extent. In my opinion, it defines a stage in knowledge in which you reach for a kind of synthesis, coming from analysis of different, for example, cortical or brain areas involved in some functions. And then, of course, with the increase of knowledge, you discover overlapping. And in the sense, overlapping, of course, from a more general or linguistic terms also include body and mind overlapping, mind and brain overlapping, of course. And also, in my opinion, emotions and cognition overlapping. The more and more you study cognition, you have to meet with affect and emotions. So, in this sense, when we study more deeply about the single brain and the single unity of an individual, as Schiller very bravely, I would say, said, do not exist an individual without a group. So, in my opinion, to really understand the topic of the body, we have to include the bodies of the others. How, in this sense, I underline what the colleagues say about the contribution of Winnicott of the relational psychoanalysis, that there is the relationship that really made the individual. And so the body is the body also of the others around me. And what's the limit of this? Well, I don't know, but I think we have to take care of it in terms also of culture, of social ambience, and so on. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Overlapping, it's often used in some of these contexts. And one question could be, what's the difference between talking about various things overlapping and talking about a kind of integration, where an integration seems like a stronger term to say that somehow or other, if we think of whatever the phenomena are, if we think of them as processes, rather than as things kind of just on their own, but as processes, then we can, I think, in an easier way, think of a kind of dynamic integration of processes. And then you get something emerging from that integration that may be, in fact, even different from what the elements are that are, engaged in the process. If we try to apply that kind of thinking to embodiment and to intersubjectivity, I think you get a concept that Merleau-Ponty talks about, and Vittorio also talks about this notion of intercorporeity, that our bodies in social interaction, it's not the individual here and the individual here, but in some way different from Winnicott's notion of a fusion. It's still a kind of integration that each has an effect on the other. And in the enactive literature, the idea is that this kind of integration, that happens every day in conversations, means that something more than each individual on their own can do. Something happens, something emerges, some kind of meaning, some kind of process that is more than each individual. And then you have the kind of looping effect as well that comes back and sort of has an effect on each of the agents who are involved in that. So there are a lot of different concepts that we could play with in trying to understand some of this stuff. Yeah. Tools for thinking, thinking of this.
All right, thank you. We have now a couple of questions from the audience on Zoom. The first one is a bit long, a bit complicated to translate, but I'll do my best. So it is from Licia Reatto, who is an Italian colleague. And she says that she has done a experimental study on apparent movement at the end of the 60s. And apparently the results brought to the identification of intermodal integration as a phenomenon of multisensorial integration, which could have different aspects in different subjects, of course. And this study gave the possibility to realize a synthetic aspect or insight or psychophysical aspect. And would it be possible to connect this to the physiologic underpinning of this phenomenon, and also the link with emotional phenomenon? The title of this article was "The Apparent Movement Between Visual and Acoustic Stimulus and the Problem of Intermodal Relations." Was it clear enough? So,
go just first, just one thing. Okay, thank you very much, Licia. Bye-bye, Licia. We are not talking about intermodal system by Stern today, and Zapparoli is on this model. We are talking about something a little bit different, and I just would like to give you, as I know, okay, and then Gallagher speaks, just to give you an idea. Read, I can send you this paper, one of the first paper of Ramachandran on synesthesia. So the visual, the hearing synesthesia is very, very important to understand this if you want to say something more challenging about intermodal integration. Okay, just to say this to Licia.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so intermodal integration, sensory intermodality. This is a very interesting topic, and there are various cases that I think allow us to study how this works, and it's usually the case where something is missing, some sensory input is missing. And you could set this up, I suppose, in experimental settings, or you can find natural conditions that seem to throw light on this. So I've worked with a neurophysiologist, Jonathan Cole, on looking at patients. He has a patient who has lost proprioception and the sense of touch from the neck down. And for that patient to be able to control his movement, he has, the way we put it is he's lost the body schema, and he has to use an enhanced body image to help him control his movement. He has to think about every movement. He has to think about if he wants to reach to grab the glass, he has to first of all think about where is his hand. Right, which is not something we do. We kind of know where our hands are, and then he has to sort of think about reaching for the target, and he has to think about how he's going to shape his hand in order to pick up that glass to take a drink. So he has to think through all of his movements. There's a little bit of automation, so to speak, in his locomotive movements in the legs, but he still has to keep track of where his feet are by keeping his feet in his peripheral vision. So he walks in a peculiar way. But what happens there is, there's proprioception missing. So what happens is that kind of sensory integration that may depend upon the proprioceptive sense, that has to change, and there has to be, again, if we think of this in a kind of gestalt sense, a change in one of those senses will affect all of the others. So one can then start to ask, what must that look like in the brain? And by looking at that particular subject and looking at others who are somewhat different, there's another patient who has lost not just proprioception and touch, but all the senses except for vision, and she has profound difficulties in movement, but her case is different because the visual sense is. Let me back up and say, In the first case of the loss of proprioception and touch, that happened to this person when he was 19 years old. And the second case, the woman who's lost, who never lost because she was born this way. So this is a genetic issue. And she never had proprioception, never had the tactile sense. She has vision. Her motor control processes are very different from the normal, but she is able to move around the world using her vision. And there was no, in the first case, because it happened when this person was 19, proprioception was, let's say, expected. So there has to be certain plastic changes that take place in certain areas of the brain when that proprioception goes missing, and then there are adjustments to be made. In the second case, when there was no proprioception to begin with, those adjustments, have already sort of been set up from the beginning, so to speak. And she is, in some ways, more capable, even with less of the sensory input, more capable on certain tasks than the first patient. Which is just to say that it's a really complex type of topic to look at. And, the idea that there are plastic changes in the brain that we can sort of look at to see how this might play out in the actual neurophysiology is an interesting question. Behaviorally, you can test and you can see differences, and those differences are in fact representing the differences between the kind of sensory information that gets integrated and the kind of lack of sensory information that's missing from the integration. And you can actually measure these things out in some fashion. But again, it's a very complex topic to look at.
Just to add something serious, okay? Just something serious. As if, because it's not the topic of today, but if we think at the research, the studies on brain to the world synchronization, okay? So if we think at this research, this field, you can find there are different temporal window integration from some sensory channel, like the visual sensory channel, the auditory sensory channel, at this moment is shorter than the window, the timing of the window to integrate more information. So we work, for this reason I said, nestedness and overlapping, because the mind works at a different level, and every time we integrate something, by longer temporal windows of integration, and that involves a lot of regions compared to just the visual, the auditory systems involved in immediately understanding something. Just to say in short this. This overlapping and nestedness, I said the final product is different from the first monomodal, we can say monomodal interpretation of the sensory channel, like visual, auditory channel. If we put all together many channels, then we put all together the emotional system, when we put the affective system. To me, affective system means the relations with the world. This is affect. How the world affect me, change me, and I answer to the word, this is affect. So the emotional system is different from affective systems. So just to add something.
So now we have another question from the Zoom attendance, and it's a complex question because this is from Patrizia Stoppa, and she refers to somatizations in which the body speaks, especially in adolescence, with the poor awareness of the mental dimension and the emotion underpinned. And so, but then there is another signature. No, it's Patrizia, yes, Patrizia Patrizia Stoppa from neuropsychiatry, child neuropsychiatry from Bergamo. So I think she refers to psychosomatics disease, but what would you like to add?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the question is.
I think that she's speaking about when the body speaks is a very neuropsychoanalytic concept. When you don't have enough mentalization and the subject goes toward a psychosomatic illness.
Okay. So, if I understand the question, there are various therapies that look at oriented towards bodily movement, right? Movement therapies and so forth, and a lot of times the idea is that the body is generating a kind of narrative on its own. And it's often expressed in those terms that the body is narrating something that maybe the subject themselves are consciously not aware of. So that definitely is something that must take a lot of talent on the part of the therapist, I would imagine, and spending a lot of time with the patient to be able to try to read, so to speak, the body and what that narrative is. As a philosopher, I have a problem with the idea that the body is narrating. I think it's practically speaking that it's fine to speak that way, and maybe it helps in the clinical setting. But just in terms of what is it that constitutes a narrative? If you're a philosopher, you want to worry about what exactly do we mean by narrative, and is it possible for something like a body to have a narrative, or is narrative something that depends more explicitly on language? Even if language itself is an accomplishment of the body and is kind of something reducible, so to speak, to movement, including gestural movement and vocalization and so forth. Somehow or other, the narrative is a richer concept. So it's possible, I suppose, to use that concept of narrative, read it back into this notion of bodily narrative, and use it in a clinical setting to make some progress, which is great. But as a philosopher, I just want to back up a little bit and say, well, I'm not quite sure I want to use the term that way, but I'm happy.
Anyway, it's so complex, this subject, that we'll have to do a conference on this topic.
May I add something? Just like to translate this narrative of the body. I agree totally. I totally agree with him. So if you consider, just to simplify, okay, as a philosopher I'm simplifying, okay, just to simplify. If something threatens me, okay, or I'm scared, no, from something, in my body, I have this expression of my hair, my hands, I become red, I'm this sort of expression. This is fear. My body at this moment, this is fear. What I'm showing feels in my body. I don't need to narrate it. My body is expressing something about the fear. This is fear. The body doesn't mean narrative of something. So because as a psychoanalyst, we used to think of the body as the body, and then psychosomatic too also. The body is expressing something. The body is saying something to me, the pre-verbal. So, no, fear means this body sensations. If I took away, throw away, okay, cut off this expression of the body when I'm feeling scared from, is this fear? I don't know. No, it's another thing.
And this goes back again to the splitting between the body and the mind and the brain. But we need to give the floor to Girion. He wants to make a question.
I'm Girion. Hoppen comes from Cologne in Germany. I'm physician for psychosomatic medicine and working as psychoanalyst. And I would like to add something, an association I had when we were talking about body image. If we shouldn't put more weight on the word image than body. A story came up which happened a few months ago. A very dear friend of mine, whom I know since 30 years, is living in Silver City in New Mexico. And when I was talking to him at the phone, I became aware he was telling stories to me. When I said something, he answered on something completely different. And he is suffering from diabetes, from polyneuropathy due to that. And I was feeling concerned. So I took the airplane together with my wife and we went there. And he didn't believe me that I told him, Paul, I have the feeling you don't hear well. He was convinced that he would answer my question and my comments. And he refused. And my wife said, Paul, I'm sorry, but I think Girion is right. You don't hear well. So we suggested him to get a test of his ears, which is not easy there because you have to take a car for 60 miles to drive through the desert. A few weeks later, he called me at the phone. I was back in Germany, and he said, I'm so thankful to you. My ear is not functioning well. We could find it out due to the test, and I get a machine. I get an instrument to equilibrate that. So what I'm saying is, I think for us it is very important to get a feeling of coherence. And if you do not have that feeling, you invent something to find back the coherence. And if you are isolated and nobody is correcting you, you are very convinced that this, what you are thinking, is reality. But it was not. So I think the body and the feeling of our body is following the necessity of coherence. We need not to feel dissociated, but associated. So my idea.
I think I just agree. Yeah. I thought you were going to actually tell me that I had trouble hearing also, which I do. But yeah, I can identify with that. Yeah.
All right, so it's time, and we now have a break of 1 hour and a half, but please be in time, so please let's meet at 20 past 12, so that at 12:30 we can start sharp, okay? Thank you very much for your attention.